It has recently come to our attention that someone on TikTok is creating a frog army.
Ready?
I'll never be ready for this.
All right.
95 days ago I rescued 1 point for million frog eggs and put them in my pond for a frog army. And now they leaving the pond. And now a million little frogs hopping around the garden. I don't think I can walk on the grass anymore. This is the biggest frog army ever, but I kind of regret this now. No one can go in the garden. The full garden and the neighbors are took over by millions of baby frogs. And there is still about 500,000 tadpoles. Follow to see the giant frog army grow. This was successful.
There's officially too much content in the world.
I don't know, I found it pretty riveting. So that's essentially the story. This guy has found frog eggs in some location near to his home that he normally finds every year, and they dry up and die. This time he took all of the eggs, approximately 1.4 million of them, brought them to his pond where they actually grew and became frogs.
I don't believe that these frog eggs, he found them. And he's saving them? I don't believe that. And now, shockingly, with all of the frog army hatched, it is apparently wreaking havoc on its neighborhood, and I don't know who saw that coming.
That sounds lily pad.
That was so bad.
Anyways, as it turns out, the frog army actually does have some supporters.
What? No, it doesn't. It can't.
Some say that the creator's heart was in the right place and that he's merely saving the eggs that would have otherwise died. Presumably, these people also want to watch the world burn.
On the other hand, several biologists and ecologists have posted online about how dangerous this is, from things like spreading disease to other ecologically based concerns.
Anyways, that's the background, and I'm totally done with the puns, so let's get into it. Is this creating a frog army legal? Asks two Harvard Law graduates for some reason.
So again, this person is unnamed, and there's some reports that he's in the UK, but we're going to pretend like he's in the US because we only know US law. Okay, so even if we assume that this frog army is a dangerous ecological problem, there's no law that bans creating ecological problems generally.
Right, there are specific laws that outlaw specific things that cause environmental problems, like discharging toxic pollutants into rivers, unless the proper permits were obtained, that is.
Many of these laws, both at the federal and the state level, ban possessing protected or invasive species. We have no idea, frankly, if these frogs are a protected or invasive species.
But if they are, his actions would certainly be illegal under one of these laws, because you can definitely argue that he possessed them by taking them from their natural habitat and putting them in his own personal pond.
Although, based on the fact that he just found these eggs in a nearby area, it's probably safe for us to assume, for the sake of our analysis, that these are just run-of-the-pond frogs. And if these are just regular old frogs, then the question of their legality becomes a little bit tougher.
Now, in addition to outlawing the possession of invasive or protected species, most states do also outlaw just possessing wildlife in general, because that's usually not good for the animals. But when these laws define wild animals or wildlife, it almost always means mammals or exotic or dangerous animals, which doesn't apply to frogs. For some reason, and I spent a lot of time researching this on a Friday night, the law just doesn't really seem to care about frogs.
But rather than illegal possession or raising or disturbing a frog's habitat, the most illegal thing about this, in our opinion, is what this guy did by creating a frog army and the nuisance that it caused. Nuisance is a weird area of the law that can be both a criminal offense and you can be sued civilly for it. So let's talk about the civil lawsuit side of that first.
A civil lawsuit is quite frankly more likely than a criminal charge, and his neighbors could sue him for any number of things, like potential damage to their property or intentional infliction of emotional distress, which is, yes, a real thing that could very well be satisfied by 1.4 million frogs running around, or even 1.4 dead frog carcasses if they end up dying. I'm pretty sure there's something in the Bible about this.
Or they can sue him for creating a nuisance. Legally, a nuisance is basically what we think of as nuisance in everyday life. It's something that's annoying or offensive and that interferes with your reasonable use of your property or your daily life.
There are, of course, criteria that determine whether something is legally a nuisance or not, all of that, but to not bore you, we'll just say that it's pretty clear that unleashing 1.4 million frogs into a neighborhood qualifies as a nuisance.
And before anyone tries to argue that what this guy did wasn't his fault or it wasn't within his control because the eggs were already there. No, you can cause a nuisance with an action or an inaction that just creates a situation that causes something harmful. He affirmatively did something by moving these eggs, which would have died but for him moving them into his own pond.
So if one of this guy's neighbors sued him for the nuisance he created, that would be a private nuisance. And the neighbor could be entitled to monetary damages or an abatement of the nuisance, which just means that a judge would basically tell him, if he's still unleashing frogs into the world, to stop. But now if the nuisance affects a large enough number of people, like an entire neighborhood, and potentially endangers the health of those people, like by spreading diseases through frogs, then the nuisance could actually be criminal.
Criminal charges for nuisance violations are quite rare, but in the case of 1.4 million frogs filmed by a guy who openly admits what he's doing, the prosecutor might very well go for it.
Especially if the frogs do end up causing some kind of disease problem in the neighborhood or an ecological disaster.
How do you end a video about 1.4 million frogs?